Hello and welcome. I'm Laura Corb. I'm a senior partner at McKinsey and Company, and I lead sustainability for North America. And 7 sectors really constitute a tremendous amount of our greenhouse gas emissions. So cement, steel, aluminum, and chemicals, along with the sectors that transport them, aviation, trucking, and shipping. And so today we're going to talk about how to decarbonize those sectors. And I'm thrilled to have Matt Rogers here. Matt Rogers is a true tri-sector athlete in sustainability. He was at McKinsey for 20 years, where he helped found our sustainability practice and lead it, as well as leading our electric power, oil, and gas practice. In 2009, 2010, Matt went to the public sector and joined the Department of Energy at a very important time during fiscal crisis, where he was special advisor to the U.S. Secretary of Energy and was responsible for distributing, I think it was about $35 billion of Recovery Act funding to help catalyze energy investment and economic stimulus. So thrilled to have you here, Matt, and thrilled to see you in person instead of on Zoom.
A wonderful thing. It's a privilege to be here.
So Matt now is CEO of Mission Possible Partnership, which is a terrific NGO that brings together climate leaders to focus on catalyzing decarbonization of these 7 high emission sectors. So Matt, I love the name Mission Possible Partnership and the optimism it brings. So maybe we'll start with, I'd love to hear more about MPP, how it got started, and what your theory of change is.
Thank you. It's great to see you. It's great to be here in Miami and to be able to engage on this question about, how do we really get solutions to the climate challenge. The Mission Possible Partnership, although lots of people say Mission Impossible when they get it described, so the Mission Possible Partnership, we stand for the proposition that we can, in fact, decarbonize these 7 hard-to-abate sectors. We have clear paths to net zero by 2050. These industrial sectors are 30% of the problem and growing because they're so core to economic growth and development. But given the scale of the problem, the Rocky Mountain Institute, the World Economic Forum, the We Mean Business Coalition, and the Energy Transitions Commission put the Mission Possible Partnership together as a platform to try to get enough resources and focus and capability that brings climate leaders together with industry leaders. And what we try to do is we started with a set of convening. So we have now 400 high ambition companies across these 7 sectors who have all committed to net zero by 2050. That was step 1. Let's crowd everyone into the room, and we've got a whole set of the big industry associations now coming into the picture and saying we too as an industry are committed to net zero by 2050. Convening step 1. Step 2 is we've put together sector transition strategies that are 1.5 degree compliant, but operationally relevant and industry-backed. What we've tried to do is define quite specifically what plants need to change when, with what technologies, in order to actually get to net zero by 2050, and then back it up because we have to get going now. Now's the time, because if we don't get a set of plants built by 2025, there's no way we get to the 2030 markers to get to the 2040 markers. So we've tried to go all the way from 2050 and bring it back to today because we need to be taking action today. The third bit then is to say, all right, let's take those broad sector transition strategies and lead to company commitments to specific action. And the ability to have companies say, we know as an industry where we're going, but as individual companies, these are the kind of things that we're going to do. These are the specific projects that we're going to commit to. As we look forward to Sharm el-Sheikh in the next COP and then to Abu Dhabi, we're going to be measured by project commitments, not by paper commitments, but by project commitments, by capital commitments, not by nice PowerPoint charts. And I think that's a major shift that we have to drive over the next 18 to 24 months. And then the last bit, and we'll spend some more time on this, is we're trying to see where projects can start now. There was a really good maritime panel yesterday, and one of the things that I think Maersk is doing amazingly well is to do the projects that matter today. Those are the projects that we need to get started on, rather than trying to wait for some magic moment in some point in time when we can do all the projects. Let's get started with the projects that we can really do today, and that is a hyper-local conversation. That is a conversation in places like Miami Beach and about the port down here. That's where that conversation needs to take place. But there are enough places in the world where we can get started at real scale that if we get going at it, we have a real shot at getting to net zero much more quickly than I think people expect.
Well, that's great to hear the practical orientation. I'd love to hear, Matt, some examples in some of these 7 sectors, maybe take a couple of them. What does it actually take to start making real tangible progress towards net zero by 2025, 2030?
So one of the, in working through industrial sectors, it's interesting, you get to go deep in places that you never quite expect to. So if you talk about cement, right? Cement and concrete. Cement leads into concrete, just to get the order of operation correct. Cement and concrete are something like 8 to 10% of the emissions on a global basis. Massive contributor to global greenhouse gases, and they're everywhere. It's in all the communities around the world because it is so key to economic growth. So what do you have to do in cement? This is under the heading of you need many, many levers in order to make that work. You need to change the fuel mix, because one of the things that you do is cement and a set of the industry sectors are all about high temperature heat. This isn't about electricity. This is about high temperature heat. So how do we do that? One of the great things is cement kilns can burn just about anything, but can we link circularity? So can we link circularity of plastics as a feedstock? Can we link circularity of biomass as a feedstock going into cement kilns? So we need to change that. We need to be dramatically more efficient on a thermal basis. Cement processes aren't that complicated. Portland cement got invented in the late 19th century, and it works really well. But putting in place the kind of control capabilities to manage thermal loads across a whole process turns out you can take a lot of emissions out of there. Clinker, which is sort of the key element going into cement, making sure you get the clinker ratios right. Putting extra clinker in doesn't actually make the concrete any more safe. And so by overdoing it, you can end up creating a lot more emissions than you need to do. Then there are things like carbon capture and sequestration that are necessary in order to take extra emissions, because a lot of the emissions come not from the burning, but rather from the treatment of limestone in the cement process. We need carbon capture and sequestration. And then there are like a dozen concrete and cement startups now in the world. The Global Concrete and Cement Association just funded 6 more this week, that are all competing out there, trying to figure out whether there are ways now that I can take concrete and cement and make them not just net zero, but actually absorbing CO2, that you can actually embed that in the process. And think about how we do that now in more than 1,000 cement and concrete facilities around the world, and how do we get individuals at the front line who actually mix cement and aggregates together to make concrete and train up a new generation on how to do that well. You get at the level of complexity, but it's not rocket science. It is a set of well-known actions that every company can take to make that happen. Another one that we get really excited about is the shipping folks. The Global Maritime Forum and the Maersk Moller Center have put together a set of these green corridors, because what you realize is they're a set of high-density corridors where the shippers, people like Amazon and Unilever, say, hey, we'd actually like to green up our transportation, and that will come back to that demand signal. But Shanghai to Los Angeles turns out to be a pretty important one. So how do I change the ships? How do I change the fuel? How do I change the way that the berth thing operates? How do I build fueling locations in both Shanghai and LA so that I can run back and forth with those kind of opportunities? And what's great then is if I do a port, turns out that if I do the ships, I can do the airplanes, I can do the trucks, I can do the cement. All of a sudden now I have an industrial cluster that can use a set of the same infrastructure and really begin to decarbonize a set of these hubs around the world, and use that as a platform for extending out across these industrial sectors.
That's great, Matt. Thanks. And I just learned a lot about cement. And one of the things we were talking about earlier is just how important it is to get cement right, because as climate change starts escalating and we have to invest more in adaptation and resilience, of course, that's more and more cement. So we've got to break that cycle. McKinsey released a report last week on charting the course to a net zero frontier for the U.S. And one of our perspectives in there is that the technologies we need by 2025, 2030 for net zero actually, for the most part, exist. So about 90% of the technologies for 2025 are mainstream or emerging, which is encouraging news. And as you think about the pathways for these very complex sectors, how do you weigh a trade-off between near-term and long-term, and what needs to be done by 2025, 2030 to get us, I was going to say keep us, but I really mean get us on a path to 1.5 degree pathway?
Well, as you described, the good news is we have the technologies to get between now and 2030 for sure. That 90%, we know how to do this. This does not require great inventions. This requires just hard work and grinding it out and making it happen. Post 2030, there's a whole new set of technologies that we absolutely need, and so we need to continue the rate of innovation in the market. But I think today the magic is about, because we have the technologies, how do we get the demand signal into the market that pulls the existing technologies into place at a faster rate? How do we put the financial industry behind that so that they start funding the real projects that are available today in the places that work? Then we can go to the government and get the last little bit, let's call it the keyhole policy solutions, not some macro galactic ones, but some real practical ones that bring real projects forward. And then how do we support the local leaders in the places where these projects can happen? Because the local leadership around everything from siting and permitting to getting the jobs right that's what's key, is the local leadership. And so I think unlocking that trend is all about bringing existing technologies into the market at a faster rate. And we need the next generation of innovation to happen. Indeed, McKinsey was quite involved a couple weeks ago in this new announcement about how to bring some of the carbon removal technologies into the market at a faster rate, and these sort of advanced market commitments. Can you tell us about what the firm was doing with that?
Sure. Well, we're big believers, like MPP, in the importance of demand signals. So we're working with our clients through their sectors to create demand signals, but we thought it was also important to be doing it ourselves. So we partnered with Meta and Alphabet, Shopify, and Stripe to form Frontier, which is an advanced market commitment for permanent carbon removals. We have an 8-year, $925 million commitment, which I envision as a starter commitment and is going to grow over time. And this is for technologies that don't exist today. And so we have an ambitious set of criteria. So for example, for permanence, we're seeking over 1,000-year storage solutions, and for costs, the ability to scale and be under $100 per ton over time. And we believe and hope that this demand signal is going to motivate researchers and entrepreneurs and investors to really focus on new technologies that will meet these criteria, and hopefully will make a big difference towards that end.
These advanced market commitments, if there's one idea to take away from today, how do we get more of these demand signals in the marketplace? Things like the First Movers Coalition that President Biden and Secretary Kerry set up to create a set of companies who are willing to buy industrial projects early, this Frontier organization. The more that we can do on these demand signals, the faster this process can actually work. Business is leading in a very important way and pulling forward a set of real solutions into the market at a much faster rate than I think anybody expected even a year ago.
Yeah, I agree. And the whole concept of advanced market commitments, it's really interesting. It was first piloted with pneumococcal vaccines for underdeveloped pharmaceutical solutions, and that's worked out well. So hopefully this will too. So as we move towards decarbonizing these heavy emitting sectors, geographies, sectors, populations are going to be impacted in different ways. And it's really important to work on not only ensuring that the transition happens at pace and in an orderly way, but also in a just and inclusive way. So how is MPP thinking about environmental health and justice as you work with all of these companies towards decarbonization?
So I think there are at least two levels where the environmental justice conversation is super important. One is, as we think about, we're focused on the greenhouse gas emissions question, but all of these industrial sectors emit things in addition to greenhouse gases. They emit particulates, NOx, SOx, all of these things which have dramatic local health outcomes. This goes back to the local story. And one of the things I think we spend too little time on, frankly, is talking about the local impacts of cleaning up a set of these heavy industrial processes. Because the health impacts on these local communities, again, communities around the port, communities around big industrial facilities, are quite profound. And being able to think about and measure how we reduce those is as important as getting our greenhouse gas emissions done on a global. One of these is a global challenge. The other one is a local challenge. And we have to keep the global and local both in focus if we intend to actually deliver on a better future for our kids and for our neighbors. So one of them is how do we get the measurement right, and some of the work that's being done in the local communities to measure these criteria pollutants is really important, because we have to be able to see it and touch it in the community in order to make that work. The second bit is about jobs. It is one thing to say there's going to be a lot of jobs in the future. That is true. On the other hand, if we're moving into a world where I'm leaving one job in order to get the other job, it only works if that other job is there and is real today. That doesn't work if it's separated in time by 4 or 5 years. One of the things we're trying to do with these industrial cluster conversations is to say, how do we get the next 10 years of projects lined up? Because we can actually see, we actually know how many projects need to get built in Houston, in Los Angeles, in Chicago, in Pittsburgh. If you can line up the next decade and begin contracting for jobs across a decade, as opposed to making that one little really shiny pilot plant that everybody gets to look at. Let's go contract against the next decade's worth, because then we can in fact have the kind of skills and capabilities that are necessary to drive down unit costs and to make sure these things are safe and reliable over time. If we don't take a 10-year view of that, I think we run a big risk of gapping on our processes, because we don't have the people, the human capacity in place to make this happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing more and more companies now really thinking through not just designing the net zero pathway, but also thinking through the Justice 40 framework and how do you very proactively frame your strategy to take into the consideration the environmental health and environmental justice framework. And I think that's super important. So we just have about a minute left. Maybe let's leave on an optimistic point, and I'd love to hear, as you're deep in these sector evaluations, what does give you optimism as we face a challenge and as we don't seem to be quite on that pathway to 1.5 degrees?
Look, the thing that I think gets me out of bed in the morning and keeps me excited every day is demand is bigger than supply right now. We have the technologies that we need, and the rate of innovation on the next generation of technologies is better than it's ever been. And there's a great momentum in the marketplace. And the places in the world where we can do real projects today, where the economics close, are myriad. There are on the order of 36 hubs in the world that we think you can get projects done today. And the local leadership in those places are making things happen, again, much faster with the local community, with the local companies. That's where we're seeing the wins. And I think as we look forward to the next COP and the one after that, I think celebrating those wins in the local communities is, I think, the thing that we should be most excited about seeing on a forward basis. That's how we should be evaluating success. And it couldn't be better. The vision for the future couldn't be brighter. But man, we got to start running like right now.
Thank you, Matt. With that, I think we need to run, and really appreciate for you bringing this perspective on such important sectors and such an important topic in solving this overall equation. So thank you.
Thank you.